Welcome everybody to the 2021 Equal Access in Science and Medicine EASM seminar. For information about Kathleen, please see the chat box. I am Dr. Tilak Ratanathan, Associate Research Professor in the Department of Biomedical Engineering at Johns Hopkins University. I'm also a faculty member of the Center for Imaging Science and the Institute for Computational Medicine. For those of you who do not know me, I have profound bilateral congenital hearing loss. EASM is run by 3 graduate students in the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. The purpose of the seminar series is to feature scientists and clinicians with mental health, disability, and chronic illnesses. About a quarter of Americans have one or more disabilities. For information about EASM, please go to the following website, equalaccesshopkins.com. But it is disappointing to note the representation of people with hearing loss in STEM and medicine is less than 0.1% worldwide. The late 70s saw a handful of Americans with congenital or pediatric hearing loss become practicing physicians. These numbers increased toward the end of the 20th century. A study reported that in 2010, there were 54 practicing and 22 trainee physicians with hearing loss in the United States. In 2015, I received from President Obama a Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering mentoring, in recognition of mentoring and advising more than 100 people with hearing loss in the United States and abroad, either in person or virtually. 20 of these mentees and advisors are now practicing trainee or physicians. They specialize in otolaryngology, radiology, anesthesiology, pathology, and oncology. The oncologist was the first with hearing loss to train as a resident at Johns Hopkins Hospital. This year, a record number of biomedical students with hearing loss applied to otolaryngology head and neck surgery residency program. It will be historic if they all get matched. Hopefully, they will emulate 7 OHS physicians with hearing loss. One of these 7 is the 2021 EASM seminar speaker, Dr. Chad Robin, who will speak for about 30 minutes. At the end, there will be a question and answer session hosted by Dr. Colin Hill, who is the second person with hearing loss to train as a resident at Johns Hopkins Hospital. Audience members may submit questions in the chat box. Okay, Dr. Robin will be introduced by a Johns Hopkins second-year graduate student in neuroscience with partial hearing loss and type 2 Usher syndrome, Nicole Panino.
Thank you, Dr. Vananathan, and thank you to everyone who took the time today to attend what will surely be a fantastic lecture. Before I introduce our speaker, I'd like to thank the sponsors who made today's event possible, including Dr. Bonnie Lynn Sweener and the rest of the Disability Health Research Center, the Alumni Association, Student Disability Services, the School of Medicine Graduate Student Association, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, and the School of Medicine Office of Graduate Biomedical Education. I would also like to thank our CART captainess, Rachel, for being here with us today. As someone who's hard of hearing myself, I'm extremely honored to be introducing Dr. Ruffin, who will be speaking today about his personal and professional experience as a deaf ear, nose, and throat doctor and ear surgeon. Dr. Ruffin was both a resident and a faculty physician at Indiana University, a pioneer for cochlear implantation and home of one of the largest cochlear implant programs in the nation. He currently practices at Proliant South Seattle Otolaryngology in Seattle, Washington, and also does academic research with Indiana University and the University of Washington. He is also a co-founder of 3 Cairns, a technology and advocacy startup based in Portland, Oregon. Dr. Ruffin has been a keynote speaker and presenter at over 30 international meetings. He was the keynote speaker for the Coalition for Disability Access in Health Science Education. He also spoke at the American Academy of Achievement, where he shared the challenges of hearing loss with heads of state and other luminaries. He has also advocated for hearing loss in state legislatures and Congress. Dr. Ruffin's experience and skills make him uniquely qualified to improve the lives of people with hearing loss. He is passionate about using his journey as a deaf patient, surgeon, auditory neuroscientist, and hearing technology innovator to help others with hearing loss succeed. Work such as Dr. Ruffin's is crucial for achieving the broader goal of supporting and enabling the success of people with disabilities in science and medicine. With that, I'd like to give Dr. Ruffin a very warm welcome on behalf of the Equal Access in Science and Medicine Committee and invite him to take over from here.
Thank you, Nicole, Dr. Tilak, Anna, and Dr. Sweenor for inviting me here. I'm very honored to be here, honestly. It's been a very long year for everyone. It's good to see some familiar faces. I also am very honored to be introduced by Dr. Tilak. As he mentioned, he has received an award from President Obama for his mentorship of deaf and hard of hearing students in science, technology, engineering, math, and health sciences. And it's to his credit that many of us are where we are today. And also because of his vision of how to succeed with hearing loss is different than what many people with hearing loss from the 70s and prior to that grew up with. Many times, people with severe and profound hearing loss were sent to residential deaf schools, and there are deaf colleges and of higher education, and deaf and hard of hearing students were often sent to these. Tilak believes in more of a distributed way of learning to encourage diversity. And it's just one way of approaching hearing loss. There are many. I think one of the things that you'll hear through my talk are basically themes of we can't cure hearing loss. Cochlear implants are great, but they don't cure hearing loss. American Sign Language has its own advantages, but it also has its disadvantages. And people have to come to their own solution, if you will, that is usually unique for every person. And I am what's considered oral, and I'm not fluent in sign language. And I organize this talk mostly around my own approach. So just remember there's a diversity of ways to help people. Sorry, I'm hearing something. You guys can hear me okay? So on that note, when I applied to medical school, there were so few role models and so much resistance to having someone with a profound hearing loss. And it really is an incredible testament that we have this lecture series and we have an academic department organized around helping people with disabilities succeed. This is something that's been a change in only the last few years. Hearing loss is incredibly important. It's underappreciated. It affects about 15% of all Americans. And it's so underappreciated that people don't realize that if you're a child and you have a mild hearing loss in one ear, you are about 3 times more likely to fail a grade. And that's a catastrophic event in the life of a child. If you're deaf, you're likely to have less than 1/2 the employment rate or the income of a normal hearing person. And the kicker about this is we have great hearing aids today. We have cochlear implants. We have a greater awareness of how to treat hearing loss. But the kicker is the socioeconomic status of deaf and hard of hearing people has not changed since these statistics were started to be collected. And so we really need to approach things differently. So my overview of this talk is basically hearing is more than a sensory deficit. How did I come to learn this? And how did I adjust to being different? And how do I treat my own patients? invariably, I have students and professionals come up to me, and they always, nearly 90% of the time, ask me one of two questions. How do you hear in the OR? How do you use the stethoscope? I'm not going to answer this question right now, but typically in today's medical environment, what happens is a patient may have a diagnosis of hearing loss. They go to their audiologist, they get hearing aids, and they get more cochlear implants, and then they're shipped off into the world. They come back annually for mappings of their hearing aids. And you're going to see how this is a woefully inadequate system for managing people with hearing loss. So now we're going to talk about cochlear implants, what they are, and my occupational, scientific, and personal journey with them. So cochlear implants are neurostimulators that are implanted into the inner ear of deaf people, and they bypass the damaged structures of the cochlea, or the inner ear, the snail in this picture, and directly convert sound to electrical signals and directly stimulate the auditory nerve. And you have a sensation of sound. And you can go from something that sounds like this.
Life is a grand adventure or nothing at all.
That is a sensation, that is a simulation of severe or profound hearing loss. You're not able to hear the consonant sounds or much of anything very well. This is what the same sound filtered through a cochlear implant.
Life is a grand adventure or nothing at all.
And I don't have the original, but it basically says life is for living. Sorry, life is a grand adventure or nothing at all. It's a quote from Helen Keller. And cochlear implants are super, I'm just going to geek out for a second because I think they're super cool devices. You can see a 20-year-old picture of a cochlear implant, and I included this because the only one that I could find that had a scale simulation. Where you can see that the little coil as point E is smaller than George Washington's face. It's about as big as his face in that quarter. They're super small. You have to drill between two tiny nerves to get to the inner ear. And you slide this little thing in and sew everything back up. And in about a month, people are turned on and they learn to hear over the course of a year. The first time I ever saw a cochlear implant was when I was a medical student and studying at the University of Washington. There was this four-year-old boy born with hearing loss so severe that even the most powerful hearing aids aren't going to help him hear. And I watched that surgery, and I mean, it was just, I still remember like seeing that little boy on a table, just a little teeny tiny lump. And I teared up because I thought that that child with those 100,000 pulses pumped into his ear would be able to avoid some of the very difficult things that I had to go through, because he got his implant at 4 years old. I didn't get mine until I was 21. And I thought that he would never have to deal with the incredible social isolation that comes with severe hearing loss, that he would not miss the punchline to jokes, or be unable to chime in at the dinner table with his friends. And when he came time to him to go to grad school or med school or whatever he wanted to do, that the dean of the medical school would not overrule the admissions committee's decision to let him in. So I teared up because I thought his life was going to be a lot better than mine. You know, and this is back in 2004 when cochlear implants, it was a very heady day in the research and outcomes for people. But as I went through my training, I discovered where there are serious gaps in how well people can perform with severe hearing loss. And
Life
is a grand adventure or nothing at all.
okay. And when I was going through training, there had been no other deaf person who had gone through a surgical residency program with cochlear implants. I had applied to an ENT otolaryngology residency program after medical school to get training in the surgical specialty that deals with communication, surgery for hearing, surgery for voice. And it took about 30 interviews over 2 years, a second 2-year research fellowship, and an extra year of internship, a trial run, if you will, before I was able to convince my field that I could take care of complex airway cases in the middle of the night. I applied over 2 years. The first year I didn't get in, and that left a scar that was super deep, super wide. It took me about 5 years to really get over that. When I applied, I had already done a 2-year research fellowship. If you look at the stats of publishing medical students, I was on the far right side of the bell curve. I had spoken to heads of state about hearing loss, and on the side, I taught myself electrical engineering to create a hearing aid to help me hear in the operating room. And I had done all of these things out of pure passion because I enjoyed it. But during my residency interviews, instead of hearing, wow, you have some drive, it would be great to have you on our team, I was actually greeted one time with, so you're the deaf boy everyone's been talking about. And I sat on the sidelines and I watched my colleagues get into the top programs with similar credentials. And I felt like I had been denied a seat at the table that my implant was supposed to give me. And despite that, my parents telling me that with hard work, nothing was out of reach, despite all of that, no one wanted to take a chance on me. And for the first time, I realized that I was different and that I was a minority. I never did attach a label of disability until that time. In a really cool turn of events, I was recruited to a residency program at Indiana University, headed by Dr. Rich Miyamoto, who is a pioneer in pediatric cochlear implantation. And I also did a research fellowship at IU, and in contrast to the research fellowship at University of Washington, that one at University of Washington was geared more towards electrical engineering, psychoacoustics, how does the auditory nerve encode sound. The one at Indiana University was more geared towards understanding how deafness changes the brain, more about auditory cognition. And this, I didn't realize it at the time, but that combination of experience, those 2 research fellowships, my surgical training, really helped me to become a much better doctor than just a surgeon who has cochlear implants and does the surgery himself. So as I devoted my life to surgical training, I started to become profoundly aware of the limitations of cochlear implants. And these limitations really are not obvious, and they can torpedo a deaf person's desire to succeed in the upper echelons of professional society. And I was really determined to understand and overcome these issues. And I'm going to show you with sound simulations some of these problems. During the residency interview process, I was called shifty and aloof. That criticism never left my mind. I started thinking about auditory cognition and autism to find some way of deconstructing the deaf auditory interview experience, so we can learn from it. When you listen to this next simulation, I'm going to play someone you've heard during this talk, a simulation routed through an implant simulator. And I want you to listen as if you were an employee sitting in an interview or getting a performance review. I want you to recall the stress and anxiety you feel while you listen to this.
Life is programming.
I'm going to play it one more time.
Life is programming.
And another time.
Life is programming.
So you can likely understand all the words, but who is that? Is that voice Stephen Hawking, or is it Nicole Panulio? Are they being sarcastic? Are they being funny? Where's this person from? Are they having a bad day? Are they tired? Are they sick? The point is, during interviews, people tamp down their body language. So how do I rapidly tell from someone's voice whether an interviewer is thinking I would be a great addition to the team, or if they're thinking about how my hearing might endanger patients? How do I do that fluidly on the fly while being witty and charming and not being shifty and aloof like a robot? And here is the actual sound.
Life is for living.
You can really hear the difference in audio quality there. So let's think about another issue. The automaticity of hearing is crucial. And remember, you had to reach out and think about what you were listening to. And we call that mental reaching out, cognitive load, or mental effort. And a hearing person, they have very low cognitive load when they're listening to voices in quiet. Cochlear implant patients are not like this. The energy that they spend to hear in quiet is really close to what a normal hearing person is the mental energy that they use to hear in a loud bar. So it's quite different. Now, what does this practically mean for people? I had a patient who is a lawyer, and he did extremely well with this cochlear implant. He hears about 100% on speech recognition materials in about the most difficult condition that we can throw at him. It's not normal hearing, but he does very, very well. So I asked him, if you were in a quiet conference room and your job is to negotiate a contract on behalf of your client between 4 other people, the room is quiet, no one's talking over one another, there's no noise. And I asked him, can you do that? And he said that, no, I cannot, because he spends so much time deciphering what he's hearing that he can't think several steps ahead to guide the negotiations to the best that he can, the best result for his client. Now, the net effect of hearing loss on cognitive load and executive functioning, thinking, planning, doing your daily life seems very obvious now that I've explained it to you. But in the operating room, when I was a resident, we were in uncharted territory. The operating room is stressful, it's noisy, and you can't lip read because of masks. When I have to parse individual words into a sentence and then think about what that sentence means, and then put that into an action with my hands. And trying to figure out what you're not hearing is super distracting. And all of this cognitive processing got in the way of carrying on normal conversation in the operating room. It got to the point where people I had attendings ask me, like, Chad, you don't really seem that engaged, like you like what you're doing, because you're very quiet in the operating room. And I'm like, this is what's going on in my head. I'm like, dude, I wake up at 5 a.m. to round on patients, and then I go to the hospital and I subject myself to the most complex listening environments that people can put themselves through as a deaf person. Believe me, I'm engaged. So I had to learn how to explain these concepts to people. So now that we have thought about hearing loss a little bit differently, and you know that it affects things more than just being able to hear the words themselves, we have all kinds of technology. We have better hearing aids, we have cochlear implants, we have auditory midbrain implants to help people hear. But sensorineural hearing loss is really, really hard to treat. You can't just make things louder. You also have to overcome lack of clarity issues. And none of these previous implantable devices or hearing aids really overcomes that issue. So let's see here. Since this is a more academic talk, I'm going to talk about some of the specific issues about that hearing loss covers. Most of you think that most of you know that hearing loss causes difficulty of hearing the words themselves. That's called lexical speech. And lexical speech is all the other stuff around the voice that provides you with information on who's talking, the identity of the person, the emotion they're using, where in the country they come from, what's their socioeconomic status, are they tired that day, are they physically fit? You can get all of this information and more just from the indexical speech cues. Now, people with hearing loss are spending so much time understanding the lexical speech that they have to jump up. It makes it difficult for them to jump from the weeds up to the forest. And some of the forest view is at the very bottom, where you talk about social cognition, how you integrate information together to come to decisions. So other skills are that hearing loss affects are pragmatics. This is what in the hearing field, the real world translation is soft skills. We talked about cognitive load. We talked about working memory. So there's a lot of variation in how much working memory someone has. And that working memory is needed so that you can process all of these cues at the same time. So that you can, while you're talking about while you're trying to understand the words of speech, you're integrating the nonverbal cues to kind of make up for the indexical cues that you're not hearing. And that requires working memory. When you're doing all of this, it takes away from your soft skills, and it takes away from your being able to give the best first impression that you can give. This is called perception formation. And all of this together relates to social cognition. So when I talk to my patients, or I talk to people that I mentor, I always take a hearing loss history and I ask when did they lose their hearing? What was the severity of it? My entire goal of doing this is to try to get at how well they're doing some of these higher ordered thinking skills, their soft skills, their social blueprint. So what do I mean by social blueprint? When you have severe hearing loss, you really can only hear about 5 feet from your ears. And your ability to go through a cafeteria, a restaurant, walk down a hall, and overhear bits and pieces of conversation is much, much more limited. I would say strikingly more limited. So you can't incidentally learn what to say, how to say, when to say it, what not to say. Learning all of this complex information happens more from direct encounters than incidental learning. Hearing people, they use incidental learning all the time, just walking past people. And this is not something that little kids get with hearing loss. So someone who grows up with hearing loss, it doesn't matter if you have oral speech or if you communicate in sign language. Practically speaking, you're going to have decreased incidental learning or a impoverished social blueprint compared to someone else. Now, let me give you an example of how that affected me when I was in training. We had a Wednesday conference and I had to walk to the pediatric hospital to attend an emergency for a patient who was having a seizure. And I was walking with one of my attendings and the nurse asked me to put in this medication that I asked her to give the patient. And she's like, well, you're not by a computer. You need to put it in. I said, sorry. She's like, can you put the order in? And I said, I'm not by a computer. It's like, well, she was basically kind of saying, I can't do anything. And I was furious inside. I mean, like, this is an emergency, but I didn't know how to delicately handle that situation. What I really wanted to say was just give the patient the expletive medication. I can't say that. One, it's not professional. Two, I got my attending standing next to me, my boss. So I turned to him and I said, look, I really don't know what to say. I don't have the experience to deal with this. And he said, all you have to do is tell the nurse what will happen if they don't give the medication, and then give them, and she will see the urgency of the situation. So we had a satisfactory resolution. I can give example on example of stuff like this that I've had to learn. All right. So now I want to shift in more to a little bit of my personal story. This talk is a little bit different than ones I've given in the past because there was a lot of people with disabilities in the audience. And I wanted to speak to them about where my self-confidence came from, how that actually became an issue, and also talk about internalized ableism and shame. So this little device right here is one of the proudest things I've ever done in my life, probably even more so than surgical training. When I was a medical student, there was so much opposition to going into surgery. I mean, actually, I would say no one encouraged me to go into surgery. People politely tried to get me out of it. And one of the lab members is an engineering student, and he was like, dude, all you got to do is create a multi-microphone system. And traditionally what we use is FM systems where I put a microphone, a wireless microphone on a speaker, and I wear a wireless receiver. And at the time, there were no Phonak Roger pens or Selects or multi-microphone speakers where I could put a microphone in each person and they came to me. And this guy was just like gung-ho. All you have to do is get some chips together, create a radio protocol, and boom, you have your system. And I'm like, okay. I'd never taken physics above what was necessary to get in the MCAT, do well on the MCAT, and was required for biology. We're talking like 1 year, and it wasn't a good experience. So I kind of like thought about that. A couple of weeks later, I had an invitation through my Howard Hughes Fellowship Program to attend a conference in Los Angeles. And this letter was carbon copied to George Lucas and Steven Spielberg. And the goal of this conference was for graduate students around the world to spend 3 days, breakfast, lunch, dinner, with symposia talk and after parties with literally the Illuminati of the world. I mean, I met heads of state, Nobel, Pulitzer, Oscar Prize winners, heads of CEOs. I walked with Larry Page down Rodeo Drive, and I remember thinking, wow, that's $10 billion right there. This is back in 2006. And they're like snipers on the roof and for security. So that was the most profound and transformative experience that I have ever had. And when I got that invitation to go to this conference, I thought to myself, well, you have been invited to be in the company of some of the smartest people in the world. By extension, they think that you are smart enough to accomplish some of the same things. And even though you may have zero training in electrical engineering to create this multi-microphone system, they think you do. So I basically went on, I spent 18 hours a day learning how to make those little lights that you see on in that picture turn on. So yeah, and that was something so deeply personal to me. And when I would share this on the interview trail, when people asked me in various ways, I actually learned not to talk about it because people didn't understand it. I remember one interviewer, I was trying to bond with him, and because he was creating a medical device, and I said, you know, I thought I did X, Y, and Z. And he's like, he completely dismissed me and was like, whatever, people don't pick up that stuff and learn it. But this little device right here is the single thing that gave me the confidence to go through some of the hardest things that I've experienced. I can always look back and say, Chad, you picked up like graduate level electrical engineering. So whenever I had difficulty or something like that, that's what gave me the confidence to push through. So now we talk about self-confidence, and now I want to talk about internalized ableism and shame. This isn't something that we really talk about all that much. And it's something that I think that we need to address more. You don't go through some of the things that I did without having your self-esteem and your psyche affected. You can't go through that amount of opposition or lack of invitation without wondering many times if you really belong in a field. We have these fancy terms like accommodations, we have legal frameworks, we have an academic discipline now devoted to ensuring the success of disabled people. But at the heart of all of this, really, what an accommodation is asking for help. It's making yourself vulnerable to someone else. And that really does change a person. I'm very, very proud of what I do now. But it was not without talking to other people, getting perspectives, having mentors to really overcome this internalized ableism or shame. So some of the skills that, some of the ways that I did this was, one, I realized that medicine does not like negativity. We don't complain. We step up and we take care of things. So I knew that I could never let that shine through at all. And one of the things that one of my mentors did was, actually, let me back up. One of the things that I've done is to cast my network very, very wide. I look for help in every place that I can find it. I have mentors for ear surgery in town and across the nation that I run cases by. I wanted to be the best implant surgeon that I could be. And surprisingly, the person who's taught me the most has actually been a person who's not a surgeon. They work at one of the implant companies, and they have taught me more about intracochlear anatomy than any neurotologist that I've ever worked with. I talk to deaf medical colleagues through the Association of Medical Professionals with Hearing Loss all the time. I reach out on Twitter. I meet, if I see ear surgeons that I think are interesting and I follow them, I've come across super rare cases and have managed them successfully because I made networks on, I reached out to people on Twitter of all places. But one of the key things of overcoming self-doubt is to realize that my experience, my lived experience as with hearing loss in combination with all of this research stuff is my fellowship in itself. It's my advanced training. And yes, I mean, that's all I can say about that. Other places that I've gotten help from, one of the academic chairs in my training program hired an executive coach for me. And one of the reasons why I shared the story from Los Angeles and that hearing aid that I developed is with the confidence thing is really important, because when my executive coach met with me and tried to teach me about communication and soft skills and that sort of thing, she told me, you know, I work with the top leaders of Indiana University Health. It's a $5 billion a year enterprise. And I've talked with all of these senior physicians, and you are most unlike any other physician that I've worked with. And she taught me how to communicate with people and how to meet them more than halfway verbally so that I didn't scare people off, and we realized goals together. So how does this affect me as a physician? So let me look at my notes right here. It's kind of hard, like putting all of this stuff together in a cohesive talk. So when I meet patients with hearing loss or professionals who need mentorship, I often refer them to my clinic because I take a multi-step approach to things. And this approach is not geared towards making them hear better. It's not geared toward solely towards making their speech perception better. My goal is to make their life better. And I do this in several different ways. I think specifically about medicine, I think about technology, and I think about advocacy. And I put these three things together when I talk to patients. So I think medical students who come to me are really interesting from an academic standpoint, because these patients these mentees are the people who are already at the upper reaches of society. Medical schools don't do a great job at admitting students who are in the middle or working class. A lot of medical students are in the upper class. So they already have access to medical care. They should have the best audiologist. They should understand how to network effectively. But generally, I've found that they don't. When they come to me, I find that there's a great deal of variation in audiological care. I find that their soft skills aren't always that great, and they don't understand how to ask for help. So I'm going to give an example from a case where a patient was referred to me for sudden hearing loss, and this patient wanted to go and become a PA. So I took a medical history, found out that she had rheumatoid arthritis, and in addition to the sudden hearing loss and balance issues, I gathered some information about her audiology experience, like if her audiologist had done the best practices for her. And then we talked about advocacy. So this patient uniformly represents what I experience with medical students. One, their doctor has never talked to them about their other illnesses and how issues like mental fatigue can wear in. If you have rheumatism, for example, you're going to be more tired in addition to the cognitive load exerted by hearing loss. So we talked about that. When I talked about her hearing aids, I learned that her audiologist had not done what's called real ear measurements, putting a microphone between her hearing aid and her eardrum. And that is kind of standard of care, especially once you start getting into the severe and profound hearing losses. And I actually find that, I would say probably about 1 in 5 audiologists adhere to best practices. I very seldom encounter students who have audiologists who think ahead and like, what are the hearing assistive technologies that this patient might need? What hearing aids should we prescribe to them based on those needs? A lot of students really need a multi-microphone setup, and their hearing aids aren't optimized for that because their audiologist hasn't asked. So we talk about that. Then we talk about advocacy skills. And this varies from patient to patient. I mean, one patient came in to me and she actually does not have hearing loss. This patient wants to go in one of the health sciences field, and they have cerebral palsy. I'm taking care of her other ENT issues, and I know that this patient has sought me out because of my disability. I'm sitting there and I'm completing my exam, and I'm thinking as I talk to her, I really should ask how she's doing disability-wide. My lizard brain, the surgeon brain, is like, Chad, you have no business talking to her about this. It's not her chief complaint. This is not why she's here. But I know that across disabilities, the ADA has not solved our problems. We still have made no socioeconomic progress. So in my mind, she's still at great risk for achieving her goals. So I asked her, I can't remember the exact question, but I asked her a very open-ended question. I said, how do you feel that your disability affects your relationship with your colleagues? And she said, I feel like people don't take me seriously, and that I have to work a lot harder. So we talked about that, and I said, this is what I advise. I think you should talk to as many people as you can, have as many mentors as you can, because those people will pull you up. That encounter affected me greatly because it was not part of the training that I had received. And I actually ran it by a few people to make sure that, I had not gone out of my lane. It was so strange. There are a lot of things that I do to make my life easier. And how to mentor patients. I think I've gone way over the time right now and the 30-minute limit. So when I have patients come to me and they say, how do you hear in the OR? How do you use a stethoscope? I'm not going to, I never start with those issues. I always go from the bottom up. Do you have the hearing? Do you have the social skills? How are you going to fit in the OR? You know, most people are concerned with how do you hear without a mask? And my concern is more these other issues. So that's how I answer those questions. I will let you read this because I've talked about all of this within, and I'm going to turn this back over to Nicole for a question and answer, I believe.